David, aren't you going to hold our daughter even just once? Claire's voice was hoarse, broken by the residual contractions and the emergency C-section incision on her abdomen that was still bleeding. She weakly reached out the hand with the IV needle, firmly planted in it towards me, her eyes pleading in desperation. I stood less than 3 steps away from the edge of the hospital bed, arms crossed over my chest, trying to pin my gaze on the divorce papers lying coldly on the makeshift tray table. No, I dropped a single word, sharp and heartless, sign it, Claire. Crying won't change my decision. The house and all the money in the account are yours. That's enough for you to raise her on your own. I don't want a child getting in the way of my career. I uttered those cruel words when our little baby had just cried her first cry of life a few dozen hours ago. I stood there, donning the guise of the most despicable and cold-blooded man in America, watching helplessly as the woman I loved with all my life bit her lip until it bled, trembling as she held the pen to sign the paper disowning her husband. She hugged our child and left in ultimate pride and resentment, without shedding another tear, exactly as I had calculated. For 18 long years since that freezing winter night, Claire always believed I was a monster who callously abandoned her and our child. But Claire, and this whole world, will never know that. Lies so cruel they make someone want to hold a grudge for a lifetime are sometimes the only way for a man to keep his wife and child alive under the sun. Every tragedy in my family began on that very stormy night that year. It was the 38th week of her pregnancy. That morning, before I left the house, Claire carefully retied my tie. She rubbed her hands over her prominent pregnant belly and smiled, reminding me, this afternoon, when you come home from work, remember to stop by the baby shop on the corner of Elm Street. The yellow newborn woolen shoes our daughter needs have been finished knitting. I kissed her forehead, promising to bring that little treasure home before dinner. That afternoon, I really did buy the shoes. They were soft, tiny, and fit neatly in the palm of my hand. But I would forever never be able to carry them through the door of our house ever again. At 7 in the evening, as I was just exiting the parking lot of the financial company, where I was the director, my car was blocked by a fleet of black cars belonging to the board of directors and their legal team. That very night, a horrifying truth was uncovered. They had used my signature and, more sophisticatedly, even used Claire's name as a co-owner of the family account to launder a massive amount of dirty money worth tens of millions of dollars. An ultimatum was thrown in my face, along with perfectly forged files. Either I obediently pleaded guilty, becoming the scapegoat to go to prison on behalf of the entire board of directors, or tomorrow morning the FBI would raid us. Then not only I, but also Claire, whose name was jointly on the papers, would be prosecuted, have all her assets frozen, and risk giving birth in a federal prison. There were exactly 24 hours to disperse the legal assets to an unrelated individual. And the only way to turn Claire into an unrelated person was for me to become her enemy. A lightning-fast divorce, transferring all assets in the form of divorce compensation, before the investigating agency could freeze everything. 2:15 in the morning. I slumped in the car parked under the snowy rain, my trembling hands tightly hugging the box containing the yellow woolen shoes. The phone vibrated violently. It was Claire calling. I knew her water had broken. I heard her panicked gasping through the voicemail. My heart felt as if someone had reached into my chest and crushed it. Instinct screamed at me to step on the gas, rush to my wife's side, and hold her. But reason reminded me of the image of Claire having to carry our child to court, losing our house, losing our future. Tears streaming down my face, I bit my lip until it bled, using my stiff fingers to type word by word. I'm stuck on a very important project. I can't leave. Call a taxi yourself, or ask your mom to go with you. I'll come in when I'm done. Pressing the send button, I rested my head on the steering wheel, sobbing like a child. That was the most cruel message a human being could write, and I had personally sent it to the woman I cherished most in my life. 4 days later, I finally dared to enter the hospital. It was the hardest, most painful acting role in my entire life. I put on a crisp suit, forcing my facial muscles into a ruthless coldness. I walked into the room, throwing onto the table the divorce papers along with the ownership of the entire house cars and clean savings. The house, the savings book. Consider it compensation. I realized I'm not ready to be a father. I can't let a family hold back my career. I said those words without daring to look into Claire's eyes. I didn't even dare glance toward the crib where my daughter was lying. I was afraid. Just seeing her for a second, just seeing that tiny hand waving in the air, my armor of lies would shatter. I would rush over to hug them both and confess everything. But I wasn't allowed to do that. Claire looked at me with eyes filled with ultimate contempt and resentment. She didn't cry. She calmly held the pen and signed the papers. The moment the last stroke of the pen was set down, Claire and our daughter were officially safe, while my soul forever fell into the abyss. I turned and walked away hearing the 5 years. That was the time I traded to buy permanent safety for the 2 women I loved most in the world. The federal prison in suburban Indiana was no place for a financial director accustomed to sitting in air-conditioned rooms, typing on keyboards, and drinking espresso every morning. In those days, the cruelest prison wasn't the gloomy gray stone walls or the cold, sharp barbed wire fences. The cruelest prison was every night, when the bedtime siren sounded, I would curl up on the cramped bunk bed, close my eyes, and hear Claire's panicked gasping over the phone that night, along with the birth cry of the child I had never held. The only possession I brought with me into that hell on earth, the only thing that kept me from going insane, was the small box containing the yellow newborn woolen shoes. On winter nights, when the biting cold drafted through the rusty window crevices, I pressed those tiny shoes against my chest. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene of my daughter's tiny feet slipping into them, taking her first toddling steps on the rug in our living room. But the price of safety has never been cheap. In a clash between prison gangs, where I was merely an unwitting bystander swept up in it, I bore the full brunt of fatal blows. They broke my right leg, and a hard smash to my head permanently robbed the hearing in my left ear. Waking up in the prison infirmary, looking at my rigidly splinted leg, and the thick ringing echoing in my head, I didn't cry. I only smiled bitterly. Every throbbing pain transmitting from my crippled joints was a reminder. Claire and our daughter were living safely, under the sun. I would rather let my body shatter in this dark corner than let them suffer a single scratch out there. The day I finished my prison sentence, I was in my 30s. The sky that day was very blue, but my world permanently carried a gloomy gray color. Stepping through the towering iron gates, I carried with me a disabled body, one deafened ear, and a dark resume. In this America, a person with a federal financial criminal record is forever a ghost. There would be no office, no company that would accept me anymore. Through Thomas, the only former lawyer who knew the whole truth and still kept in touch, I learned Claire had moved to a quieter neighborhood, used the money I left behind as capital, and returned to work at the Central Library. She did very well. My Claire was always strong like that. She proudly stood up from the pain of being betrayed, held her daughter by herself, and named her Emily, Emily. A truly beautiful name. To never accidentally run into them, I moved to the western edge of the city, almost 40 miles away from where Claire lived. I rented a boarding room less than 10 square meters nestled in a run-down industrial park. The room had no heater, peeling walls, and was filled with a musty smell. On the only rotting wooden table in the room, I placed a small glass box, inside which were the yellow woolen shoes, the sole radiant treasure that lit up my life. With my limping leg, I got a job doing manual labor at a lumber mill during the day. At night, I took on a cleaning job at a food packaging factory. From a man accustomed only to holding a pen, to sign million-dollar contracts, my hands began to grow calloused, bleeding from wood splinters piercing my flesh and cheap cleaning chemicals eating away my skin. In the freezing winter days, my broken leg joints from years ago ached so much that I had to bite tightly on a roll of rags so as not to let out a groan. I lived on discounted peanut butter sandwiches, canned bean soup, and wore the same old wool coat bought from a thrift store over and over again. I wrung out every drop of my deteriorating strength, not to survive, but to entrust every penny I scraped together into a secret account managed by lawyer Thomas. I asked him to establish the Sunlight Scholarship Fund. When Emily was 10, Thomas sent me an email that completely changed my life's purpose. Emily had a natural gift for the cello. She played so excellently that the teachers at the city conservatory affirmed she was a prodigy. But to pursue the path of classical art, Emily needed a professional cello worth thousands of dollars, along with expensive intensive courses. That night, reading Thomas's report lines, I covered my face with my hands, sobbing with pride and also sorrow. My daughter was a genius, but Claire, with the meager librarian's salary of a single mother, was staying up all night calculating every penny. She had sacrificed too much already. I couldn't let Claire have to strip away Emily's wings, just because of the destitution that I myself had indirectly caused. The very next day, the Sunlight Scholarship Fund officially contacted the music school. I used all my meager savings from over the years, plus borrowing an advance of 3 months' wages from the lumber mill boss, to transfer straight to the school. The representative only left one message. An anonymous benefactor has been following and believes in the little girl's talent. The day Emily received her new cello, Thomas secretly took a photo for me. Seeing her hugging the polished cello to her chest, her radiant smile shining like the sun next to Claire's tearfully happy eyes, I felt all the physical pain of the past years turn to ashes. For 18 long years, I chose to exist like an invisible parallel line, silently running alongside the brilliant orbit of the mother and daughter. I never missed any of Emily's concert performances. Whether in local auditoriums or grand theaters in the city, I was always present. I had no right, nor did I ever dare to buy tickets in the front rows filled with lights and applause. An ex-convict, crippled and unkempt person like me would only sully that solemn space. I always bought the cheapest standing tickets, hiding in the darkest corner in the attic of the auditorium. I pulled down my frayed woolen hat, wore my faded wool coat, and held my breath leaning against the wall. With my right ear, the only intact part of my hearing, I intoxicatingly swallowed every somber, resonant musical note my daughter bowed. Looking at Emily sitting on the center pedestal, in a gorgeous evening gown, her delicate, ethereal face under the spotlight, I felt as if I were looking at an angel. She has Claire's resolute eyes, and a high nose bridge like mine. Also from that hidden corner, I gazed at Claire. My wife, the only woman I love, was sitting in the front row, wearing an elegant dress, smiling proudly with her eyes closed, feeling her child's music. Time had left a few wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, but in my eyes, Claire is still always the most beautiful and proudest woman in the world. I knew I wasn't allowed to step down there. I am a black hole, and they are the stars. If the black hole gets too close, it will swallow their light. There were winter blizzard nights that covered the roads in Indiana. When the show ended, the bustling crowds rushed out to the main lobby, shining with chandelier lights. I always took the emergency stairs, meant for janitors to sneak out, tucking myself under the shadows of the back porch of the theater. I remember vividly one Christmas night when Emily was 15. Snow was falling heavily. I hid behind a freezing stone pillar, looking through the foggy glass. Claire was carefully wrapping a woolen scarf around Emily's neck, mother and daughter laughing and chatting animatedly before hurrying out to the parking lot. The stormy wind blew their hair wildly. I unconsciously took a half step forward, the instinct of a man wanting to open his arms to shield his wife and child from the wind flaring up fiercely. But then, my crippled foot pounding into the snow with a heavy thud dragged me back to reality. I froze. I pulled my hands back into the pockets of my tattered coat. I watched the red taillights of Claire's car slowly fade into the white snowy curtain. I smiled softly, whispering into the cold void, "Merry Christmas, my two loves." Then, I turned my back, dragging my limping feet, trudging through the snow that flooded over my ankles, my worn-out safety boots slipping several times on the slippery ice, silently walking 3 miles to catch the latest night bus back to the slums. Many times, the lawyer Thomas looked at the bleeding scars on my hands and sighed, asking, "David, how long are you planning to hide? Aren't you going to tell them the truth? Claire has the right to know she misunderstood you." I just smiled and shook my head. How could I? How would I dare? Emily was a rising cello artist. Her future was as brilliant as the dawn. If the press or the public knew that the father of that female artist was a crippled, filthy ex-convict, once involved in the shocking, money-laundering scandal from years ago, her career would be destroyed. Claire spent 18 years cleaning up the ruins I left behind, building for Emily a perfect sky without a single cloud. By what right do I bring the black cloud of my life to obscure it? I'd rather be a nameless, anonymous sponsor, rather bear forever the name of a scumbag, a traitor, as long as my daughter gets to smile happily and my wife gets to live in pride. Love sometimes is not about standing next to each other for the whole world to see. Love is my willingness to rot in the dark underground, just to be the source of nutrients to feed a flower above ground blooming brilliantly. I thought I would live out the rest of my life like that, silently enduring and watching. But the safe orbit I painstakingly preserved for nearly 2 decades was about to shatter. Last month, Emily turned 18. Not long after that, she received an admission letter from the prestigious Juilliard School of Music in New York, the biggest dream of both mother and daughter. I was so overjoyed that I took the spare change I had saved up to buy a cheap bottle of beer to celebrate by myself in the boarding room. But the joy was short-lived. Yesterday morning, Thomas called me, his voice full of panic. "David, something happened." Thomas's voice echoed through the phone, mixed with heavy breathing. "The girl." Emily refused to accept the new sponsorship for the school year at Juilliard. I was stunned. "Why? What happened? Is our fund short of money? I can ask to work more night shifts." "No, it's not about money," Thomas interrupted me. "She said she is 18 years old now. She refuses to go to New York if she doesn't get to meet and personally say thank you to the person behind the Sunlight Fund." Claire tried to dissuade her, but she is very stubborn. I froze, my hand holding the phone trembling violently. "You didn't say anything to her, did you? You promised me." "I didn't," Thomas snapped, his voice helpless. "But David, she quietly hired a private detective herself last month. She traced down my intermediary account, and right now, that detective is tracing back to the cash deposit addresses. David, they are heading towards you. At this pace, by this weekend at the latest, they will find the address of your boarding house." The phone slipped from my hand, falling onto the rotting wooden floor with a dry thud. I stood rooted to the spot, in the middle of the cramped room, my heartbeat pounding rapidly, as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. 18 years of hiding, 18 years traded with blood and humiliation, was about to be laid bare just by my daughter's pure affection and gratitude. I turned to look at the glass box on the table. The yellow newborn woolen shoes still lay there, silent and fragile. They used to be my light in the dungeon, and now they were about to become the witness to the greatest deception of my life. What must I do? Run away once again? Or stand still, face Claire's eyes after all these years, and let her see that the man who was once the pillar of her life is now nothing but a pitiful cripple? In November outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. The biting cold drafted through the door crevices, piercing to the core. My daughter's 18th birthday had not long passed, and the day when Claire and her daughter would push the door into this dark place, forever tearing away the curtain of secrets I traded my whole life to conceal, was counting down by the hour. Fate in the end does not let a liar off the hook, even if that lie was spoken from a bleeding heart. I didn't run away. That weekend, I didn't go to work at the lumber mill. I sat still in the boarding room, wiping the rotting wooden tabletop one more time. I didn't want them to see a room too filthy when they arrived. I wanted them to see a father trying to live, even if only flickering like a lamp before the wind. A knock on the door rang out on Saturday late afternoon. It wasn't forceful like the urging of the police, but hesitant, probing. I stood up, my broken right leg from years ago, protesting with a sharp, piercing pain, but I ignored it. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my trembling hand, and turned the doorknob. The person standing before me was not the private detective. It was Claire. She was still beautiful, still proud as always, though her eyes were now imprinted with the wrinkles of time and the harshness of life. Behind her, Emily was standing, a tall figure, hair flowing to her shoulders, her big round eyes exactly like mine. She looked at me, then looked at the shabby room behind me, the curiosity in her eyes gradually replaced by an incomprehensible shock. "David," Claire exclaimed, her voice trembling and trailing off. It was as if she couldn't believe her eyes. The man standing before her was not the dashing director from years ago, but a tattered, aged, and withered ghost. "Hello, hello, child," I mumbled. My throat felt bitterly choked, unable to utter another word. Emily took a step forward. She looked at the boarding room, her eyes grazing over the secretly taken photos of her performing, plastered all over the peeling wall, then stopping at the glass box on the table. "Is this the home of the Sunlight sponsor?" Emily asked, her voice cracking. Claire didn't wait for me to answer. She squeezed past me, stepping into the tiny room. When she saw the wall full of photos of Emily from when she was just learning to walk to when she stood on the grand stage, and when she saw the old yellow newborn woolen shoes in the glass box, Claire froze. She slowly turned around, her eyes fixed on me, as if trying to read what had happened over the past 18 years. "Why?" Claire whispered. She picked up the woolen shoes, her hands trembling violently. "Why are you here, you? You have a criminal record. You were fired. You abandoned me and our child. But why?" I couldn't bear it anymore. The lies of the past 18 years burst open. I knelt down, not because I wanted to beg for forgiveness, but because I no longer had the strength to stand firm before the truth. I took out from the drawer the thick file folder that Lawyer Thomas had handed to me, the file containing all the evidence about the money laundering case, about the board of directors' threats, about the cruel divorce decision, and also my medical records in prison. "I didn't abandon you too," I choked out, tears rolling down my scarred face. "I was just a coward. I didn't know any other way to save you both from prison that year. If I didn't divorce you, if I didn't take the blame, they would have dragged you into prison too, Claire. I'd rather let you hate me for a lifetime than let you watch our child grow up in a prison." The room sank into a dead silence. There was only the sound of the wind whistling through the window crevices. Claire collapsed onto the floor. She read every page of the documents, read the fake messages I sent on that fateful night. When she saw my medical records, saw the notes about my leg being broken, my hearing damaged, Claire's shoulders shook violently. She didn't scream. She didn't smash anything. She just hugged the files to her chest and bowed her head to cry. That cry was not anger, but the scream of a heart shattered by realizing it had lived 18 years in the most cruel misunderstanding. Emily stood there stunned. She approached me, looking at the withered man before her, the person she used to hate bitterly for abandoning her and her mother. She looked down at my calloused hands, my fingers broken by labor. "Dad," Emily uttered, a word she had never been allowed to call out throughout 18 years. When Emily touched my shoulder, an electric current ran down my spine. I looked up at my daughter, seeing in her eyes not contempt, but an astonishment mixed with boundless compassion. I used your money to study music," Emily asked, her voice breaking. I nodded, trying to crack a smile, even though my face was shattering with tears. "Not my money. It's your money. I was just keeping it for you. I just wanted you to step into the light, my daughter. Once you have stepped into the light, never look back, and never look for ghosts like me." Claire stood up. She walked up to me, knelt down facing me. She reached out her trembling hand to touch the long scar on my forehead, the scar I had received in a prison brawl. "You're so foolish, David," Claire sobbed. "Did you think you were protecting us? You were only killing us with your silence. Do you know, for the past 18 years, every time I saw Emily playing the cello, saw her laughing happily, I wished you were there. I didn't need money. I didn't need the safety of that house. I only needed her father." I looked into Claire's eyes, seeing my reflection in them. 18 years of hatred, now only a sorrowful pain remained. I couldn't give her a father with a criminal record. I whispered. You gave me the greatest father in the world, Emily said, interrupting me. She hugged me tightly, a firm, warm embrace, the warmth of my daughter. What I had once craved to the point of madness was now enveloping me. That was not a cinematic happy ending. There was no miracle to make my leg whole again, no miracle to erase 5 years in prison and 18 years living in darkness. But when Claire placed her hand on mine, and Emily rested her head on my shoulder, I realized I had been saved. We left that shabby boarding room as the sun began to set in the west. Claire drove. Emily sat in the back seat, holding my hand tightly, not letting me take my eyes off her for even a second. When we arrived at the old house, where I had left 18 years ago, everything was still the same, only the trees had grown older. Claire opened the door, stepping into the familiar living room. She had kept everything exactly the same, as if waiting for someone to return. Tonight, Claire said, looking at me with unusually gentle eyes, you will sleep in the master bedroom. Emily will sleep in her room, and you don't need to hide from anything anymore. I stood in the middle of the house, breathing in the air filled with the scent of family. 18 years living in the dark, 18 years being a parallel line. Finally, I was able to touch the light. That night, I lay on the old bed, listening to the sound of Emily's cello echoing from the next room. She was practicing a new piece of music, the piece she dedicated to her benefactor. The cello sounded melancholic, yearning, but full of hope. I was no longer a ghost. I was a father, a husband, a man who got to return home. Life can take away your youth, honor, health, and 18 years of your prime. But love, that cruelly sacrificial love, will eventually find its way home, no matter how long and painful that road is. It took me 18 years to learn that lesson, but perhaps those were the most worthwhile 18 years of my life. I closed my eyes, sinking into my first sleep in 18 years, without having to worry about how I would live tomorrow. Because tomorrow, I will wake up, and the first person I see will be Claire, and the second person will be my daughter. That is heaven. The first morning, waking up in the old house, I lay motionless on the bed for a long while, staring blankly at the ceiling. There was no piercing alarm siren of the prison. There was no roaring truck horn outside the slums. There was only the chirping of birds outside the windowsill, and a streak of golden sunlight draped across the soft cotton blanket. I slightly stirred. My broken right leg joint from years ago still transmitted a familiar ache whenever the weather changed. My left ear still rang from the aftereffects of the vengeful beatings. The truth is, love, no matter how great, is not a fairy's magic wand. 18 years of trading had robbed me of my youth's strength and a sound body. Real healing is not completely erasing the scars, but learning how to let those scars be exposed under the sun without feeling ashamed or in pain anymore. The bedroom door gently opened. Claire walked in, holding a steaming cup of coffee smelling of cinnamon, exactly the flavor I was addicted to in my 20s. She sat down on the edge of the bed, silently looking at me. Under the morning light, I saw more clearly the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes and a few silver strands of hair on the head of the woman I love. I instinctively retracted my calloused hands, covered in cut scars from wood splinters and factory chemicals, hiding them under the blanket. But Claire was faster. She grasped my hand, pulling it out from my cowardly evasion. She brought my bleeding, rough fingers to her lips, placing a gentle and careful kiss, as if touching a holy relic. "Don't hide from me," Claire whispered, her eyes welling with tears, but her smile incredibly radiant. "From today on, you don't have to hide anything from me anymore. We've wasted too much time covering things up." I smiled, squeezing my wife's hand lightly. For the first time in almost 2 decades, I felt like I could breathe a complete breath. My process of returning to society and family was not paved with roses. The psychological trauma from the federal prison still occasionally dragged me into sweating nightmares in the middle of the night. It took me a long time to relearn how to use a knife and fork in a fancy restaurant, or how to converse with neighbors without keeping the defensive attitude of an ex-convict. But I was not alone. Claire patiently accompanied me to my psychotherapy sessions. She used the family's savings to buy an old small pickup truck, opening a small carpentry workshop for me right in the garage behind the house. There, with my hands accustomed to rough wood, I personally built new bookshelves for the library where Claire worked, and polished the cello cases for Emily. That silent work gradually washed away the inferiority complex within me, showing me that someone who had fallen into the black mud could still create beautiful things. 3 months after the day I returned, Emily had her final solo performance at the City Auditorium before officially moving to New York to enroll at the Juilliard School. It was an evening in February, bright with lights. For the first time in my life, I didn't wear my frayed wool coat. I didn't have to take the fire escape stairs to huddle in a dark, musty corner in the attic. I wore an ash-gray suit that Claire had personally chosen and tailored to fit my slightly hunched shoulders. I linked arms with Claire walking through the grand hall. My crippled leg made my gait limp, my pace slow and clumsy. A few curious glances from other elegantly dressed parents were thrown our way. Perhaps they wondered who this withered old man was, that he was walking with the proud mother of the cello prodigy. If it were the old days, I would have hung my head low and tried to disappear. But tonight, I held my head high, because on my left was the wife I had used my whole life to protect, and before my eyes, on that stage, was the future I had wrung out my blood and sweat to nurture. Claire and I sat down in the very first row, the most central position in the auditorium. When the red velvet curtain was drawn up, Emily appeared in a sparkling evening gown. She hugged her cello, stepping out to the center of the stage. The entire auditorium sank into absolute silence. Instead of bowing the first musical notes, Emily slowly walked up to the microphone. She looked straight down at the front row, her gaze directed entirely at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily's clear voice rang out, echoing against the marble walls of the auditorium. "For the past 18 years, I have always believed that I was raised by the great sacrifices of my mother, and by the miracle of an anonymous angel called the Sunlight Fund. I used to be angry, used to resent the father, whom I thought abandoned my mother and me on the most freezing winter night." My heart pounded heavily. Claire's hand tightly squeezed mine. "But today," Emily continued, a teardrop sparkling, reflecting under the spotlight, "I want to dedicate this piece, not to an inanimate charity fund, nor to an anonymous sponsor. This piece is dedicated to the man sitting in the very first row, the one who would rather smash his own honor body and freedom to be a parallel line in the darkness, shielding the light of our family. Dad, thank you for carrying the most cruel darkness on your back, so that I could stand here, proud under the sun." Emily lifted her bow. The resonant cello melody rang out. It was not a sad piece of music, but an epic anthem of life, of rebirth, and of endless gratitude. In the audience I cried. Tears fell profusely on my scar-covered face. For the first time, Those tears did not carry the salty taste of humiliation or pain, but were as sweet as a thawing spring stream. The surrounding audience began to stand up. They were not only applauding the music, but it seemed they were applauding the truth that had just been laid bare. In that moment, all the injustices of fate, all the lashes of the prison years completely vanished. Last week, my wife and I drove the small pickup truck carrying Emily to the airport, sending her off to fly to New York to start a new horizon. When hugging my daughter to say goodbye, I slipped a small box into her hand. Emily opened it. Inside were the worn-out yellow newborn woolen shoes. "Take them with you," I gently instructed. "They kept me alive through the darkest days. Now, let them remind you that, no matter how far you go, no matter how vast your sky is, there is always a place for you to return to." Now, in our small, light-filled home in suburban Indiana, peace has finally taken root. Claire and I cannot turn back time to reclaim our lost youth, nor do we try hard to do so. The greatest waste of a human life is not losing time, but endlessly mourning the past instead of cherishing the present moment. On free afternoons, I usually brew 2 cups of coffee, sitting next to Claire on the wooden porch swing I built myself. We lean our heads against each other, listening to the old radio, softly playing 80s love songs, and reading the long letters Emily sends home from Juilliard. If my family story can leave something behind, I hope it will be a reminder to all those reading these lines. This life is much more fragile than we think. The boundaries between happiness and tragedy are sometimes separated only by a stormy night. Do not let misunderstanding deepen into an abyss. Do not wait until time wears away half a lifetime to realize who is truly willing to sacrifice for you. Look deep into the eyes of the one you love and say words of thanks, apologies, and love right in this moment. Because in this world full of harshness, having a person to trust, a home to return to, and a second chance to make things right is already the greatest miracle of human existence. The story of David and Claire has closed, but its resonance will perhaps linger for a very long time in each of our hearts. 18 long years. 18 years of bitter misunderstandings, of wounded pride and sacrifices buried in the darkness. Through this story, we suddenly realize love sometimes is not about flashy promises under glamorous lights, nor is it about always standing next to each other for the whole world to admire. Sometimes, the greatest love takes the form of silence. It is the acceptance of embracing prison, shouldering all humiliation and darkness, just to keep the sky of the one you love forever clear and blue. But you know, this story is also a heartbreaking wake-up call about the fragility of relationships. Do not let silence turn into an abyss. Sacrifice is noble, but understanding and sharing are the true foundations of a family. This life is very short, and not everyone among us is lucky enough to have a second chance to undo misunderstandings and start over like David. If today you still have someone to call family, someone to wait for you to step through the door every afternoon, please do not hesitate to show your love. Put aside your proud ego. Have the courage to speak out your troubles before they turn into wounds hard to heal. And most importantly, say words of love while you still can. Do not wait for tomorrow. Do not wait until the storm hits, because the only thing that can fight against the impermanence of time is the love we give away right in the present moment. Thank you for listening, and empathizing with every heartbeat of the characters in today's story. If these written pages touched you, send a message or give a tight hug to the person you are thinking of right now. Wishing you a very peaceful evening with your loved ones. See you again in the next healing stories.